Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Free Motion Quilting Project. Today we're going to learn a new stacking design. This is basically a variation of pebbling, whereas pebbling is circles and ovals all stacked together, kind of like a cluster of pebbles that you see on a beach. This is cobblestones, and it's basically a very wiggly, wobbly, irregular shape, still stacked together, lots of travel stitching, lots of intense thread play. Creates a very, very beautiful texture on the surface of your quilt. This one might be ever so slightly more challenging than pebbling simply because you're creating something irregular and traveling on a regular line. I personally have to think about this one just a little bit more than I had to think about pebbling, but it's really down to the way that your brain works more than anything else. Don't feel intimidated, just jump right on your quilt and let's get started. Alright, so we're right here and getting started quilting, and you can already see this texture starting to build up, and it's a very similar texture to pebbling. The only difference is we're going to stitch kind of a wiggly wobbly shape. I'm going to travel stitch along the previous ones and then just wiggle. Now I really do like a lot of travel stitching when quilting stacking designs. I just think that they look better that way. So when you see me, I complete the shape, kind of a circle, and then swing all the way around with extra travel stitching. That's just me building up thread. Please understand it's not required. You can just simply quilt the design itself like this and then move on to the next one without the travel stitching involved, and that's just fine. You have to kind of look at what you are wanting from your quilt, what effect that you want in the end, and then stitch it the way that will create that effect. Now I'm getting just a little bit of rippling in here. You can maybe see it underneath my foot. Kind of back up just a little bit over here so that way you can see it a little bit better. This rippling right here, it's basically the puffiness of the batting coming through and starting to create some ripples on the surface of the quilt. It happens. There's really not a lot that you can do with it, particularly when quilting on a small scale. This is what sometimes happens. What I generally do with rippling is I just try and either completely ignore it or I try and incorporate it within the quilting. And so you can see that that ripple, while it's still there and I would see it, more than likely no one else would. But it's one of those things where it does happen and you just have to kind of start to adjust around it. Now, for a bigger scale, for a bed quilt, I wouldn't even think twice about it. I just, that's just a normal process. For smaller scale, particularly art quilting, wall hanging kind of work, I do look for those types of things and I try and minimize them whenever possible. One suggestion is just to kind of take your hands and do a little bit more spreading and squishing. Really pull down on your thumbs. Remember, I'm pressing down with my hands almost the same strength I would to wash my car, so that way I have more strength, more pressure going down. And if I'm pulling down with my thumbs like this, then I get even more kind of tension being put on the quilt top, and that usually sorts out a lot of those ripply effects as well. So you can see cobblestones is really just wiggling and wobbling, then carefully travel stitching, and wiggling and wobbling some more. It's just really a free form shape, and then the texture is really nicely built up by doing some extra lines of travel stitching. Now if you find your thread breaking in this design, that is usually an indication that the thread that you're using is either too thick or too weak to do this. For years and years I really wanted to stitch pebbling, and I couldn't stitch pebbling because the thread I was using 100% cotton thread, and it just could not handle this much travel stitching. As soon as I switched to isocord, I was able to quilt these designs with no problem. So just keep that in mind. If you're breaking thread and it's really driving you crazy, chances are a thread change, a change to something else, would probably fix that. So now I'm just finishing up the space, and it's perfectly fine to kind of cut your cobblestones in half. So I'm just wiggling in with some small ones here. Still keeping it as wiggly and wobbly as I can. Sometimes it's not always easy to keep the wobbles going, but just keep it in your mind. Now in this situation, I'm going to point this out. I have got almost a pleat right here. You can see how the fabric folded over, and it just naturally happened whenever I was stitching. That is a pleat, and it's continuing over on this side. So that when I stitch this, it's going to kind of do that number. Now, pretty much, there's two things I can do. In this situation, I can leave this exactly how it's stitched. I can rip it out and try and put more tension on the quilt and stitch back through it and see if that takes care of it. But knowing where it's at and the location's at, I think I'm going to leave it in, and this is what I'm going to do. I'll come out of the space, stitch through it, and allow that pleat to be formed exactly how it's folded over. Just like that. It's not very noticeable, but here's how it's even less noticeable. I'm going to build up this edge, just travel stitching back and forth. You can always add more thread, and that is my motto this year. You can always add more fiber. So you can see that pleat is still there. I mean, I can pull my seam ripper in there and kind of play with it a little bit, and I can continue to add thread through here, and that's going to look just fine. Now, if I put this on a bed quilt, an intense amount of travel stitching like this is not going to hurt the bed quilt, but it's probably going to be kind of stiff, and usually not something that you really want on a bed quilt. But would I even be nitpicking this on a bed quilt? Absolutely not. You know, ripples and pleats and this kind of thing, this is very small, this is very nitpicky. I absolutely wouldn't be analyzing it and you know, having a big to-do about it on a bed quilt at all. So for a wall hanging, for a show quilt, this kind of thing, this is how I would solve it. I would add more thread to the area. If it really bothered me, if it was a huge pleat, if it was very unsightly, if it really showed up, I'd rip it out and see if I couldn't fix it. Why is this happening? Number one, it's very dense stitching. Number two, it's a very puffy batting. Those two things often results in the fabric doing some really funky things, and that's okay. There might be some people that would say that if I had basted this, hand basted this, or basted this much more tight, yeah, that's something to try. It's something to play with. There's no control group for any particular quilt. You have to kind of analyze and figure out why you're having a certain issue. And of course, either rip it out if that issue bothers you, or figure out a way of adding more fiber until you hide it enough that you feel okay about it. I really like the motto, just add more thread, because it seems to cover up just about everything, and it takes no extra time. To rip that out would have taken, you know, 15-20 minutes, and it's not something I really want to do today. And I think that my solution here looks just fine. So that's it for Cobblestones. I really hope that you'll give this design a try, and don't be intimidated if your quilt starts doing something funky if you stitch on a small scale. This is normal, it happens, and you have to learn ways of adjusting around it. Of course, if you're interested in learning this on a big bed quilting scale, that's an entirely different ballgame. Definitely check out my Craftsy class, Free Motion Fillers Volume 1. And in that Craftsy class, I teach this particular design on a much bigger scale, as well as a beautiful variation of it called Oil Slick. So definitely check that out, craftsy.com. And of course, check out hundreds of other free motion quilting videos posted weekly at freemotionproject.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.